You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250, where we look at events that took place 250 years ago this week. This is from the American Revolution Podcast, just a short bonus episode to remind you about important anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember the Battle of Machias, June 11th and 12th, 1775. The siege of Boston meant that the British Army had trouble getting enough food and supplies. Bringing everything over from London was expensive, and in the case of fresh food, impossible. The Navy had to find sources for food, hay, and wood. They had to extend their search beyond Boston Harbor. A few weeks into the siege, two merchant ships, the Unity and the Polly, sailed into Boston Harbor with a cargo of lumber. The British, with a growing desperation for lumber, needed for firewood and a host of other things, welcomed them into the town. The captain of these ships, Ichabod Jones, had sailed down from Machias, a small town of less than 100 families on the coast of what is today Maine, but of course at the time was part of Massachusetts Bay Colony. It was an isolated community with nothing around them but miles of wilderness and not always friendly Indians. Jones had sailed his two ships to Boston in hopes of trading his wood. It's not clear if his friends and neighbors back in Machias knew that he intended to trade with the British rather than the provincials. His decision to do so may have been less ideological and more to the fact that he had family who had gotten stuck in Boston and wanted to leave. General Gage and Admiral Graves allowed Jones to sell his wood and also take his family and their personal property out of Boston, something that was technically forbidden under the Boston Port Act. But needing merchants who would provide much-needed supplies, Gage permitted the transaction. As part of the deal, Jones agreed to return to Machias and bring back some more wood for trade. Although Jones was willing to trade with the army, it was unclear if he could convince the rest of Machias to go along. Like most colonists, the people of Machias supported the provincial Congress and had no desire to violate any of the rules against trading with the British. Jones was certain, however, that the desperate situation of the people would force them to go along with any trade they could get. To ensure Jones performed as promised, and to make sure other naval vessels did not detain him, the Navy sent one of its own ships, the Margaretta, along with him to return to Machias. The Margaretta was a pretty small tender ship with a crew of between 20 and 40, accounts differ. One source I read said it had only a few swivel guns. Another one, which I tend to believe more, said it had at least 4 small cannons as well. Either way, it was intimidating enough for most merchant vessels, but not much more than that. On June 2nd, the convoy arrived in Machias. It took several days before Jones could call a town meeting to get approval to trade with the British Army in Boston. Though the town generally supported the patriot cause, it had been hit hard by a drought and the closing of Boston Harbor. With the outbreak of war, few traders were even stopping there. Without this trade, they might starve over the winter. A good negotiator might have been able to convince the town to go along with the trade, but Jones was not a good negotiator. Afraid that the patriots would attack him or his property for trading with the British, he insisted that the townspeople sign a document approving of his actions in trading with the regulars and agreeing to protect him and his property against anyone who might take action against him for his trades. He did this with the guns of the Margaretta pointing at the town. On June 6th, the town held a meeting at Burnham's Tavern. Faced with the very real possibility that the Margaretta would level their town, or that they would starve for lack of supplies, a divided majority voted in favor of Jones. With that, Jones docked his ships and offloaded his supplies. However, Jones would only provide food to those who voted in his favor. Those who voted against him got nothing. The hardcore patriots in town who had voted against Jones decided that they really had nothing to lose. Without food, their families would starve. Benjamin Foster was a lieutenant of militia and a sometimes business partner of Jones. He and another prominent patriot, Jeremiah O'Brien, organized a group of patriot militiamen with the goal of capturing the ships and taking the British crew prisoner. Without any comparable arms to use against the cannons, they needed the element of surprise. June 11th was a Sunday. Both Jones and Captain Moore attended church services in town. The Patriots assembled a group of about 30 militia to capture the men on land and then demand the surrender of their ships. As they approached, those in the church saw the men advancing and they had time to escape. Moore and his first mate escaped out of a window and were able to return to their ship. Jones fled into the woods and hid. Once back aboard ship, Captain Moore threatened to destroy the town unless they returned Jones. Unimpressed, the Patriots swarmed onto one of Jones's ships and demanded that Moore strike his colors and surrender. His refusal led to a brief firefight with small arms. As night fell, the British captain decided things were getting out of control, so he weighed anchor and began to float downstream. Having taken control of Jones's ships, the Patriots pursued the Margaretta. The ships began a running firefight in the dark. The Margaretta was not fast enough to escape and had to stop several times to effect repairs. By the following morning, June 12th, the Margaretta sailed out for open sea. Jeremiah O'Brien had taken command of the Unity with a crew of about 40 volunteers who sailed after the Margaretta. The pursuers had no cannons on their ship and were armed only with muskets and swords. The other colonial leader, Benjamin Foster, entered the fray aboard another small merchant ship, the Falmouth Packet, which had docked at Machias. Foster commandeered the ship, took another 20 patriot volunteers aboard to pursue the British. The Margaretta had a few miles head start and probably could have escaped, but the ship accidentally turned into the wind, causing the sails to swing wildly across the deck and slammed into another part of the ship, which damaged the sails. The crew spotted another small merchant ship. Moore sent over a boarding crew to that ship to take it and force it alongside his damaged one. The crew removed the boom and the gaff from the other ship to replace their own damaged parts. Now, just as they were finishing repairs, the Unity and the Falmouth Packet came into sight. The ships exchanged fire in another running firefight. The slower-moving Margaretta was better armed with its swivel guns and grenades, but the Patriot ships were faster and had more men. Eventually, the Unity rammed into the Margarita's starboard, while the Falmouth Packet pulled alongside the ship's port side. The crew of both ships jumped aboard the Margaretta and began hand-to-hand combat. The fighting finally ended when Moore took 2 bullets to his chest and stomach. His first mate was also shot, but not as seriously, and ran below deck and hid. The crew finally surrendered, and all 3 ships returned to Machias. There, Captain Moore succumbed to his wounds the following day. I've seen contradictory casualty rates. The highest I've seen say the British lost 5 killed and 9 wounded. The Patriots may have suffered 10 killed and 3 wounded. The Patriots used the guns of the Margaretta to arm the Polly and renamed it the Machias Liberty under the command of O'Brien. They would use it to capture 2 more Navy schooners later that summer. The Patriots took Jones prisoner, confiscated all of his property, and sent him with the surviving crew of the Margaretta down to the Provincial Congress as prisoners of war. The Battle of Machias is sometimes called the Lexington of the Seas because it began the naval war of the American Revolution. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. For more of the story, please check out episode 63 of the American Revolution podcast.